We are back. Another episode of the Gold Standard. Joe Danneman and Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie is fresh off a plane from Las Vegas, where he was at the Major League Baseball GM meetings. And Charlie said such a fun thing before we started taping. He said, it's such a cool thing we get to catch up while it's on a show, because I have so many questions to ask him about the GM meetings. I have them all written right here on my iPhone, ready to ask you so many follow-ups about all the stories you wrote about the Reds. But let's start with the Bengals, because there was a big topic this week. It could be debated how big of a deal it was, but Joe Burrow is back on the practice field, I think a lot sooner than any of us thought would happen. So Joe is back on the practice field. How big of a deal do you think this is?
Now is the opportunity for, ideally, there's not any setbacks or for the schedule to really ramp up. Just the fact that Burrow's throwing routes on air now, it's something he's been doing. He's already been running. He's been lifting for a while. But now's kind of the, for lack of a better term, the muddy middle of the rehab process. We're really going to learn over these next 3 weeks just how aggressive the window is, because here's either where something could go hopefully not wrong, or something could go really right, and the fact that Burrow very quickly gains all the confidence he needs and the medical clearance he needs to truly be back on the field for Thanksgiving. So that's all going on right now.
It feels like that's what Joe hinted at, right? That he wants to be back for Thanksgiving night against Baltimore, when he had the long pause and said, we'll see, when he was asked if that's the target date. But the two great debatable questions are what I'm going to follow up with. And let's start with this one. The first one would be, how dependent should it be on the Bengals' record? Because if 3 weeks from now is the target, that means it's Pittsburgh and it's New England the next 2 weeks. Do the Bengals have to win a game here to maintain some kind of a playoff hope to get Joe Burrow back on the field?
It depends on how cut and dry this clearance is. And I'm just going to say it's like a cut, just to use like a little metaphor. If I have a cut, well, does it need to be all the way healed, completely skinned, to use this? I did terrible in science in school. For you to play? Or is there some more gray area where you'd be taking some risks and you'd be pushing it, but there is that potential payoff for the team? If this is completely cut and dry, well then yeah, you're just waiting to sign off a box. If it's not cut and dry, you can't take any risks of it being not completely healed unless you are truly, truly in it. So I think they need to win 1 or 2 games if it's in the less cut and dry department, but if it's in the completely cut and dry department, just whenever he's good.
I'm stunned you weren't good at science.
Terrible.
Really?
Terrible.
You?
Yeah.
Mr. Analytics? Mr. Scientific way of looking at sports?
Really? I mean, sorry to my teachers. I had some fantastic science teachers. That was the problem. Sure, I'll share this. Like, science was the one area where I didn't take the advanced level classes.
Really?
Yeah.
What was your strength?
I think my strength and my favorite subject was French.
Not
that I speak French now, but I like the process of learning a new language and going through all of that work. I feel like is the most similar to like learning the language of the Bengals or learning these in-depth things that are completely foreign to you. I feel like French was the most carryover.
Okay, so pardon my French, but a lot of Bengals fans think it's bleep, bleep crazy to even consider putting Joe Burrow back on the field this year. So that's part 2 of these follow-ups here. Do you think it's the right decision for the Bengals in what is realistically not going to be a playoff season, considering their record, considering their defense, considering also the schedule they play here the next 5 weeks? Do you think it's the right decision to even consider playing Joe Burrow in the second half of the year?
If he's fully cleared and medically signed off by multiple parties, heck yes. Burrow, if he doesn't play, is going to be incredibly rusty next year. To go basically not 2 full seasons, but it'd be like a year and a half from really not playing football from January of 2025 against the Steelers, like week 18 last year, until September of 2026, whenever that is, week 1, they'll probably be in Cleveland or something next year.
Of course.
To go that long without playing football is too much for me. And I feel like you would be subjecting yourself to some real rust. Things would be looking, it's just such a long time. I'm worried about the 2026 Bengals. Even if the season's over, you need to make sure Burrow's played enough football so he feels caught up by the end of the season.
But you think playing games against the Arizona Cardinals and the Cleveland Browns in December will help him in September of 2026.
You know what Matt McClain told me?
See, I knew this was going to Matt McClain.
He said Burrow needs a rehab assignment. And he said that to me in September. And Burrow's not going to get one, assuming these are meaningful games for the Bengals in 2025. But if they're out of it, that's all this is, a rehab assignment. You can't totally control it, but you can put some guardrails up in terms of what you call how quickly he throws the ball, how little he runs. Use it as a rehab assignment to knock off the rust. And who better than Matt McClain to know what these things can do?
You know who needed a rehab assignment? Matt McClain in 2025. We can talk about that some other time. One more on Joe Burrow here. What do you think this speaks of to him? The maniacal will to get himself back to a point where he's on the practice field and pushing to play a little bit later in the season. I'll be the first to admit when he went down with the injury and it was surgery, I said, he's done. He's not coming back. That was kind of my first thought. What do you think this speaks of to Joe Burrow and his competitive nature?
Well, clearly he's just attacked this, and it's another example. I'm getting mentally ready for, who knows? I wouldn't pick the Bengals to win in Baltimore, even if Burrow's playing, but mentally ready for if that happened, that would be one of the greatest single stories that I've ever covered. If that's any sort of meaningful game and Burrow comes back off this major injury on that timeline and upsets the team that I know their record's bad, but right now is the division favorite. If on paper that gets the Bengals back in it, oh my God, that's something we're going to be telling, a story we're going to be telling for the rest of our lives. So I've started to think about that possibility, and boy, that sure would be special.
Okay, I have one more quick one on Joe Burrow because Joe Flacco has been playing great football, right? But still, it hasn't been enough these last 2 weeks against the Jets and the Bears. Even if Joe Burrow comes in and is Joe Burrow and helps his team, does he bring another quality of whatever it is that uplifts the entire team that gives them a better chance of winning, even if the quarterback play is pretty much on par with what Joe Flacco is doing? He threw for 400 yards the last game. He was amazing against the Bears, and it wasn't enough. Does Joe Burrow's presence make that much of a difference to make the Bengals more dangerous and more likely to win football games?
If the Bengals defense was even a smidge better, I'd say yes.
Yeah.
But because they are where they are, they've got to be so, for lack of a better term, lost in their own malaise or in their own state of panic, fear, anxiety, whatever's going on. Things are so bad on that side of the ball. All that Barrett Carter's thinking about is how he makes more tackles, now he finishes more plays and diagnoses plays with more patience. All that these young edge rushers are able to focus on is how the heck do I develop a pass rush plan that can lead to me winning? They don't have enough time to be thinking about who the quarterback is on the other side because of how bad things have been.
One final Bengals thought here. It's at Pittsburgh this coming Sunday. What's the general thought here of the path for the Bengals to play better football in the second half? Because we've seen them the last 2 weeks put up all the points but still not win. What's the path for this defense, this team, to be more competitive in the second half of the season and get themselves back into a position where maybe they're still in it in late December?
Can it just be fundamental on defense? Can you finish plays? Can you execute plays? Can you pass off assignments? Can you communicate? Before the snap, can guys step up and make the right checks and communication at the line of scrimmage and really take it over and make this defense feel like it's their own? That's all stuff that has to happen for the Bengals to really win any sort of meaningful run of games, even during the second half of the season, regardless of whether or not the Bengals are in it. And that's something they desperately need, record or whatever it is, down the stretch.
I mentioned at the top of the show, Charlie is fresh back from the GM meetings in Las Vegas for Major League Baseball. So let's transition from the Bengals now to the Reds. You spent 2 days talking to GMs from all over Major League Baseball, including Nick Kroll and Brad Metter here in Cincinnati. What was your general takeaway from your time with Nick and Brad talking about the 2026 Reds?
It sounds like the 2026 Reds will look a lot like the 2025 Reds. You look at the fact that they have about $15 to $20 million of payroll flexibility to work with. You look at the fact that they don't view themselves as having a surplus of tradable starting pitching. You look at the fact that you can pretty much shoot those Hunter Green trade rumors down, and they're not set up. They're not building this with the idea, with the plan to be, now is the time to trade top prospects for high-impact guys on the roster. So while there could be some tweaks, some adjustments that could change kind of the way the pieces fit together, kind of shuffling that around in an interesting, different way, by adding this, by adding that, The bullpen will look different. But they don't really have the wherewithal to be too creative right now.
Two things you said in there I want to drill down on. You said Hunter Green trade off the table?
It's never even been a story, is what I've learned.
Non-story.
Non-story.
Okay. Second one is you said $15 to $20 million. That's flexible spending they can do. You wrote a story saying that the payroll is going to look a lot like it did last year, but they have $15 to $20 million for shopping for what? We're talking bullpen. We're talking an Austin Hayes replacement. That's not a lot of money,
Yeah, they
Charlie.
need to replace 4 relievers. They need to replace Austin Hayes, Miguel Andujar, their 5th starter, Zach Littleson. They're not going to be able to do all that. They're going to need guys, like Chase Burns, or not Chase Burns, Rhett Lauder and Brandon Williamson to stay healthy. They're going to need guys like, can Blake Dunn give them something in 2026? Obviously, Sal Stewart for a full season. Hector Rodriguez coming up and making his debut. Maybe we see Edwin Arroyo at some point. It's going to be stuff like that, and then a couple other depth moves where they try to really find value wherever way they can in a way that fits with what they have to work with.
So it seems like, as you said, it's going to look like a lot it did in 2025, but they need some of those guys to take a next step, right? The Matt McClains needs to get back to what he was. You mentioned some of the other guys. Rhett Lauder needs to step up. Chase Burns for a full season. Sal Stewart, can he take that next level and be a productive guy for 162? That's interesting. You wrote an article on Charlie's chalkboard about when it's time to make the big move. Can you describe and explain what the big move is and what you learned from talking to other GMs about the process of having the right feel of when it's the right time to make the kind of move that the Reds have made here in the past, right? You wrote about Matt Latos. That was the big move when they put all their chips into Matt Latos and making a run for it. Can you explain that article?
Every GM has a different approach on team building and philosophy and when to go for it, when to push different buttons. And we know the Reds, we keep hearing the word sustainability. They're going to build from within. They're going to draft, acquire, and develop in the amateur and the international and in the draft markets. And they're going to try to build something where they're not operating in windows, where they want it to kind of, a consistent flow of young talent is what they're trying to do. And they've done a nice job of that now, but it has to stick, it has to last, it has to turn over. Man, do some other teams look at this unbelievably differently. And I asked a bunch of other GMs, how do you know when to go for it? The Diamondbacks GM said, we do that every year, and we look for those moves. Last year we did them. We're going to do it again in 2026. I had one GM tell me, well, with my old team, ownership wanted us to really not invest at all in the farm system and just take all of those resources and push them back over to the big league level. And then you have other teams that are, like the Marlins are saying, we've got to just put all of our resources in the draft develop model and not even have guys like, your Nick Martinez and Emilio Pagans like the Reds have had in the past. A million different ways to look at it. The big takeaway, though, is it all comes down to ownership, who you want to be. Ownership
is always paramount in a decision like this. Do you feel like the Reds, this is just me asking you, this isn't anything a GM told you or Nick Kroll or Brad Metter, do you feel like the Reds are in position organizationally to go for it, to make the big move?
I think they're in position to go for it. I don't expect them to say we are abandoning this sustainability plan and forget 2029 and 2030. This is our window. That's not what I expect to happen this winter. I would take a different approach for a team that hasn't advanced in the postseason in so long. Now the risk doing so, your collateral is 1 or 2 years of Ellie De La Cruz on the back end and how soon you have to trade him based on how competitive you are in 2028 and 2029. And I get that. And I understand that. I really do. But also on the flip side, what can you do to chase the Dodgers?
I'm glad you mentioned Ellie De La Cruz because when you and I last talked here, we said one of the questions you had to get to the bottom of when you went to the GM meetings was, is Ellie De La Cruz going to move positions? He's not moving positions. He's staying at shortstop. Was that brought up with Nick and Brad?
Yeah, so a couple things. Ellie's earned this, but also where were you going to find a second baseman?
Yeah.
Second base is
Spencer
actually...
Steer.
That's another. I think Spencer Steer playing second base is more of an emergency backup
Okay.
situation that wouldn't be. But yes, something that Nick and Brad specifically said was they've talked to Spencer about doing what he can to be available to play more second base in 2026. I would think that would be in a more backup role for a team that's prioritizing defense. And you love Spencer at first, but Spencer at second, that'd be like asking, Dylan Fairchild to kick out to left tackle. That's just not what he's built to do. Ellie, can you get him more off days? Can you get him more DH days? Can you keep him healthier in 2026 than he was in 2025? What they believe is that in the first half of the year last season, Ellie's defense was fine, solid, still volatile, but highlights mixed in with the errors and fewer errors. Then he was hurt, he was banged up, he was playing too much, he was tired, they admit mistake there, and it kind of snowballed. So if you can eliminate that possible regression and continue his development, he's still so young, working with the coaches on minor technique, fundamentals, adjustments, arm angles, etc., then they feel like they can get to a workable, solid, even potentially nice spot for Ellie's defense.
Ellie is such a great focal point for the next point I want to make is you wrote about style of play. And style of play comes down to, are the Reds going to run more? What do their at-bats look like this coming season? Things that both Brad and Nick are talking about with style of play. What stood out to you about the conversation about what this team is going to look like style of play in 2026?
Doubling down on the major adjustments they made last season. I keep using the word scheme change. They brought in a whole new defense, except with the offense, in 2025 compared to, the David Bell era. Yeah. And that included even, Chris Valeka, their hitting coach. He has minor league organizational duties. He creates that curriculum that they use to then teach to their minor leaguers. So emphasizing quality of at-bat, emphasizing consistency on base, being tough, being professional, as opposed to selling out for homers and power, emphasizing more situational hitting, emphasizing much less aggressive running or running just to run. That's where they've gone. That's what they believe in. That's something that Terry Francona, Nick Krall, Brad Metter, their coaching staff, they're aligned with that. Now, is that the best way to squeeze as much upside as possible out of this team? Probably not. It is a way to raise the floor of the team. It did last year. They made the playoffs. And they're going to double down on those adjustments with different plans for each guy to tinker some stuff, the players, to do that in 2026.
At this point last year, we had no idea who would pitch in the ninth inning for the Reds. I go back to spring training and Terry Francona saying it would be situational. They didn't really know who it would be. But Emilio Pagan got the job. Did a solid job as the Reds closer in 2025. He's a free agent, so he's gone. There's a chance he could come back to Cincinnati. I doubt it. I'm sure he's priced his way out of Cincinnati. We'll see. But closer is an interesting spot, and I think Nick Krall acknowledged that it's an important spot, understanding that the ninth inning is, quote from him, a different animal. How do you think the Reds will approach trying to find a closer, a ninth inning guy for 2026?
The Reds aren't getting Kyle Schwarber. Yeah. There are a lot of fun conversations the Reds don't get to have. Like, that would be a fun conversation to have. But closer's the one thing that from now until opening day, all right, we're going to be talking about this. It's fun. It's exciting.
Yes.
They're going to be, while they're not going to go out and get a stud name on the market. Yeah, like it's a fun baseball debate. What are they going to do at closer? I think a leverage guy is one of the areas they'd be a bit more aggressive in. I think they will explore trade opportunities, but there is also a decent class of free agent closers with closing experience who, like any reliever, have had their ups and downs, but have shown at least some experience and credibility in that role. And each has their different flavor. Emilio Pagan, he's a very consistent guy. You know what you're going to get night in, night out of him. Not elite stuff, susceptible to the long ball, really takes the ball. You can go with that. You can go with Ryan Helsley, who was a superstar closer until he blew up like the sun in the second half of last year. You can go with Kyle Finnegan, who's had his waves, but he's been generally in the ninth inning. He's fine. But if he doesn't stick in the ninth, you can put him in other high leverage roles. You can go out and get a true capital C closer who maybe isn't in their prime or that good anymore, but Raisel Iglesias or Kenley Jansen, they know what to do in the ninth inning. They can handle it. You just put them in the ninth and see what happens on a decent bargain. So Or it could be a guy, maybe we're not anticipating with little closing experience. Or maybe they just get an 8th inning guy and bump Tony Santi into the 9th. So these are all the options they have, a lot of different ways it could go, and it's a fun little baseball debate.
I was going to say, man, you were in your bag on that one for a couple of minutes. I would argue Ryan Helsley might be the Reds' 2025 MVP because he completely torpedoed the New York Mets second half of the season. They made the trade for him, and I said, oh my gosh, look at their bullpen now. They're going to run away with it. And he completely torpedoed everything they wanted to do in the second half, and the Reds took advantage. Okay, let's go now to the Gold Rush. Rapid fire questions for Charlie Goldsmith. We're going to stick with the GM meetings. I'm going to dive more now into what it was like to experience it. It's the first time you've gone there, okay? So paint the picture for what it looks like. You go there as a reporter, and all the GMs for all the major league teams are there in Las Vegas at a hotel. What does it look like?
Very dependent on the venue is something I learned. And of course I was at one of the casinos in Vegas, which they're very big, as you might imagine. So this was a more spread out, everyone kind of in different corners. I'm making long laps around this hotel and casino trying to be where the action is. A lot of waiting in the lobby, a lot of purposefully running into people. The Reds had their front office core there. There were also some other front office people around baseball who I had connections with, who I wanted to make sure to run into. Also nice to see some of the other reporters from around the country who maybe you don't see regularly. In terms of structured media stuff, there is an hour window on Tuesday and an hour window on Wednesday, where on Tuesday it's all the NLGMs in a room for an hour and a half with about 30 reporters. That's cool. That's good access that you can get a lot out of talking on and off the record with guys. And then the ALGMs the next day. Scott Boras does a press conference where he has really bad puns. Have you seen these?
No.
What's an example? I don't know, Alex Bregman's a free agent. Boras represents him. He's talking about Brexit in Beantown, where you can get a double shot of offense and defense or something like that.
Can't wait to hear what he says about Ellie.
And it's a great point. He has all of these memorized bits that he does and unleashes every year. And then you see the other agents as well. They don't have their press conferences.
He's the only one who has a press conference?
The only one who has a press conference.
Unbelievable. Okay. Outside of Nick Krall and Brad Metter, the two big decision makers here in Cincinnati, who was the one GM you were looking forward to speaking to most?
It wasn't that I was going in to say I got to talk to this one or that one. I kind of bounced around either in the room or in the lobby. And the Phillies GM, Dave Dombrowski, who previously had been with the Red Sox, the Phillies, the Marlins, and the Expos, and the Tigers. Wow, he's had a lot of jobs. But that was kind of the point. Varied backgrounds. Talking to him about team building was really cool. Talking to him about that idea of when to go for it, of ownership's role in that. And he's talked about the different hats he's had to wear and the times where he knew he was doing something that was in the bad long-term interest of the organization and how that impacts the way he approaches his job now, even though he's in a market in Philly where he has to be very all in. So that was, now I'll tell you what, the one question I have that I didn't get to ask that was written in my notebook was, ask the new Rockies GM. Do you know who the new Rockies GM is?
No, bless his heart.
Paul DePodesta.
Hey, I know that name.
You know where he's from?
No.
Paul DePodesta was the guy that Jonah Hill played in Moneyball.
How about that?
Who then spent the last 10 years as a high ranking executive with the Cleveland Browns. You didn't know that, did you? Yeah.
I did not know that.
The Browns hired him to start their whole analytical decision making. He's going to save the Browns with numbers. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
He jumped ship. Went to Colorado. Anyway,
you go for the Browns of the Rockies. Bless his heart.
I wanted to ask Paul DePodesta about the Bengals defense. But I did not get the chance. That was truly written in my notebook to ask, but I did not get that chance.
Well done. Okay, last one here for the Gold Rush. Outside of you, who obviously went to Nick Krall and Brad Metter to talk to them, were there other reporters who were interested in talking to the Reds front office folks? And if so, what were some of the conversations? What were some of the questions people were asking that you heard from out of market of interest in Cincinnati?
There was only one, and during the time I was spending with Nick, which was one question, which were a couple of reporters asking about trading Hunter Green, and Nick was. I'm not going to say Nick was getting annoyed, but Nick was getting annoyed. But they're not planning to trade Hunter. Hunter Green trade rumors are the exact same as Andrew Abbott or Ellie De La Cruz trade rumors right now, and we're not talking about any of that. So those were something that came up. the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Area people always are connected with Nick because Nick started out as in a very, very low level role. I believe even doing some behind the scenes grunt work with the Oakland A's. I believe he was a bat boy even as well for a while.
Wow.
This was in the Moneyball era, speaking of Moneyball. So those connections that he have, those people always check back with him on different things. But aside from that, there was not a big scrum around Nick Kroll and Brad Metter.
Okay, now the golden nugget here. This is when Charlie gets to take over the show and give us a thought from inside your notebook, an interview, an anecdote, something you're working on. The floor is yours, the gold nugget, Charlie Goldsmith.
Can I tell you one more thing about Vegas? Can that be
Please.
my gold nugget?
Yes.
So there was this one spot, I don't even know if it had a name, but shout out to this one spot on the second floor of the hotel we were at where they would bring us, or not us, they would bring you're at the bar, hey, can I get a spicy tuna roll? And they bring out like a roll of dimes, like a mini spicy tuna roll. How about a salmon roll? And they just keep them coming. And they're one by one, these mini rolls, $6 a piece.
Whoa.
So I can get anywhere between 5 to 8, depending on how hungry I am. And they got to know me pretty well over the course of this weekend. I'm a big sushi fan. It was perfectly located. They keep bringing them out. You don't even have to decide how hungry you are, because you give me another one of the California rolls. And they were good people. They treated me well.
By the way, Charlie did not put $1 American on any kind of table in Vegas. Not one.
You know what? Maybe I would have if they had been showing the UC Dayton game in the sports book.
There you go.
But while it was very big to me, it did not make that cut in a very shocking, we got to have some accountability here.
A lot of turnovers for the Bearcats, but
Yeah.
a nice win for
Yeah.
the Bearcats, off to a 3-0 start. He's the great Charlie Goldsmith. This was a fun episode. I'm really glad we had time to dive in to your experience at the GM meeting, something you'll be doing for the next 35 to 40 years in your career as one of the best baseball writers here in Cincinnati. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Gold Standard. We'll see you next week right here on Fox 19 now.